Okay. So yeah, so let's move on to food and agriculture. See no questions or concerns. There's a new setup over here. So where did my stuff go now? Where's my sharing? I don't know where it went. There it is. Okay. Okay, so everybody should now see the screen that says Chapter 9, Food and Agriculture. Yes? Everybody seeing that? Just signify with your thumbs or tell me on the chat. All right. Okay, so let's get moving with that. So some of the main key issues that we have, we'll be looking at why people consume different foods. The way I set it up, I kind of sometimes I try to be, like I say, I always follow the format of the book, but I kind of start a little bit kind of with the origins of agriculture to sort of fit it a little bit more sequentially, but everything will be touching there as well. So why people consume foods, where did it originate, and where did it distribute? Those are some of the typical things that we look at when we look at any topic. And then we're going to look looking at some issues of sustainability, particularly with farmers who are the ones who do agriculture. Um, so some of the things we'll be looking at, we're saying how consumption of food varies around the world. And both in the amount of sources where the food comes from as well as nutrients. The kinds of food that people consume around the world depends on the level of development. Developed countries tend to consume more food from different sources than developing countries. Um, um, Things that impact, for instance, the kinds of food that you have is physical conditions. Certain climates are going to allow you to grow certain types of products. And so only there are certain products that are going to be largely consumed in developing countries. And of course, cultural preferences, food preferences and avoidance of certain kinds of foods are definitely expressions of culture. And we'll see that manifested in different ways throughout the world. So what is agriculture? In terms of a definition, is the deliberate cultivation of plants and animals for foods and materials. By the way, I'll set up the template for the last set of key concepts that we'll have for the semester, and I'll probably have those going sometime later this afternoon. Again, the usual deal, you'll have them set up to the entire basically the remainder of the semester, so you can work on them as we go along. So uh, so everything we eat and produce is basically set up this way. Um, it is a sort of a modern thing that started about 10,000 years ago, and I mean relatively modern, in that from 10,000 years ago, basically everybody was hunting and gathering, right? Uh, at some point, we had what is referred to as an agricultural revolution in many different places around the world. And again, that made us modern. The fact that we can now, rather than moving around, gathering food, trying to look for game, for animals to hunt, and instead we could just settle in one place and have grow our food and grow, raise our own animals. That kind of made us modern. That was part of what is referred to again, the agricultural revolution. And what that allows us to do is basically to have higher levels of population. We allows us to also set up permanent settlements. Again, we'll talk about that later on and towards the end of chapter 12 and then in 13 when we talk about urbanization, that it was because of this sort of agricultural revolution that we were not able to have some of the things we talk about in chapter 8 about, the city states. People would actually be able to gather in one place and just not have to move in different places. And of course, that allowed for more complex societies, sort of like, again, the modern way that we understand cities and settlements today, and largely due to this agricultural revolution. So, where were some of the origins of agriculture, and how they diffuse? We'll get out to that later on, of the diffusion part. But so we can see that various products in what is referred to as different hearts, where agriculture emerged. Um, uh, People sometimes say it was discovered, but it wasn't really discovered. But there were places, there were hearts where agriculture production thrived, and of course, in different parts of the world, based on climatic conditions and so on, on geography, different products were raised. You can see that in Latin America, and largely what is referred to as Mesoamerica, and parts of the top of South America. We had a lot of products that were raised there by people from even before the Aztecs, um, um, who were some of the first generation, the Aztecs and the Incas, who were you know about 1,000 years before the Spanish came to the Americas, were growing a lot of these products, and some of these products are native, are origin. Endemic is what the word that is officially called, endemic to Latin America, because they were raised from a long time ago. And that includes animals as well. Like I mean, we don't know much about alpaca or llamas, particularly in the highlands of South America, that they were grown for their skins, for people to wear, to protect themselves from the cold. We had a hearth also in what is today called the Sahel region, which is actually drying out. We'll talk about that later on. But there was a hearth right there as well, with various products in Sub-Saharan Africa were being grown. We perhaps also somewhat familiar with those in the Middle East, in the Mesopotamia region, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Again, that's one of the regional places um, um, where agriculture was started as well. So we have some places in Central Asia, around what is today called Kazakhstan, where, again, various products. In Mongolia, for instance, horses were domesticated. We had a lot of products in East Asia and China, rice, the northern part, millets, and other products. And then, of course, in Southeast Asia, many of these products that we are now basically very familiar with originated from this area. So these are some of the hearts. These are some of the primary sources from some of these where some of these products began to be domesticated, began to be grown. Again, we have a few secondary places that sort of tie into some of these hearts. And then you can see sort of the way that they diffuse. Many of the products in Mesoamerica, for instance, diffuse to the north, to some of the indigenous groups that existed way before the colonial came into the Americas northwards. And the same thing in South America, from those hearts, some of these products move into to different parts of South America. And again, you can see the patterns. Mesopotamia is what basically led to dispersion of some of these processes, because again, some of these were new technology, were modern technology. The fact that people were growing stuff, it also moved into Europe, and again, you can see the patterns. So again, much of that of these domestication referred to as the agricultural revolution that I mentioned earlier is again the idea that humans could now rely on product without having to go out and hunt. They can grow their own food. They can domesticate their own animals. And again, we just saw some of these hearts, and I'll show you some of the products. I'm highlighting these because again, in many to various sources, scholarly work that has been done in this area, basically point to the Mesopotamia region right here in again between the what is today Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates River, that valley that is still there today, is still a highly agricultural production region of the world. And that's estimated to be one of the very regional places where this agricultural revolution originated from. All right, so far so good. Now, what was it in these places? What conditions led to this agricultural revolution to take place there? And again, when you see some of these hearts, there are conditions that basically led for it to happen. Again, you can see it right here, the heart that I was talking about. In fact, even today, it's called the Fertile Crescent. It involves some of the most ancient civilizations in the planet. And again, this is still very active today. So you have a very favorable environment in terms of climate. By the time that this agricultural revolution took place, the ice age was already moving out. So even some of these again the tips of the ice age hit in some of these places that you probably wouldn't think haven't seen ice in those places. But so that the climatic condition changed to the point that it was not as harsh in terms of climate. The fact that you have river valleys with water and soil that basically allow for some of this production. Some of these what is referred to in geographic terms riparian environments, again, places that are right next to a source of water, like a river. Rivers, in addition to providing water, of course, they also carry material around along with them. And they, what we call fluvial material, they carry soil around. And it's usually they picked up really a lot of really good sources of minerals. And they carry those minerals around. They, in many places, deposit them in some places. And some of these fluvial plains that sometimes are referred to are places that are very good for crops, to grow food. So river valleys, of course, in many places also in the tropical region, which sometimes are very harsh for agricultural products to be raised, in higher elevations, such as, for instance, in Mesoamerica, right through Mexico, the southern part of Mexico, all the way through various parts in Central America, and then some of the higher elevations up in Colombia, what is today Colombia, Ecuador, and so on. While you have certain tropical conditions that you know that perhaps will make it hard for products to be, say, grown in the jungles. The high elevation is still relatively warm. It's warm enough. It's wet enough because high elevations give you a lot of more rain. And then again, you also have a lot of the really good soil, particularly in areas that have volcanic soil, where there's a lot of volcanic activity, such as, again, the Mesoamerica in the Valley of Mexico, Guatemala, many of those places right through there. There's a whole series of it's a lot of volcanic activity. It's a lot of tectonic plates that are colliding there. They're creating volcanoes, and when these volcanoes do their thing, they spew a really good source of minerals that make those areas very fertile. It was also cultural, of course. It's basically a culture for people to say, find a particular location. I mean, when you look at those sources, again, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Well, the fact that you had favorable conditions that you could actually grow crops, it gave people ideas. Again, rather than hunting and gathering, maybe we can just grow our own food. They started domesticating some of these products that they saw going wild, like some of the wild versions of maize or wild versions of barley or wheat. Eventually, once say, okay, we can grow these things over here, it can give us the food that we need. And then the same thing with animals. They can say, well, rather than chasing around some of these animals, we can perhaps just raise them around us. So again, a lot of cultural preferences have to see with this. The idea that many people much rather settle. And again, based on what was available, for many people, it was just a better idea culturally to simply just stay in one location. And again, you also have to have animals that were, what is what I interesting word here, domesticable animals that let themselves to be domesticated. Not, you know, you cannot. It's very hard to perhaps domesticate a lion. And for one thing, you know, well, probably the meat may not be as good, or they probably doesn't produce a lot of milk. So you begin to domesticate animals, such as cattle. You know, what we refer to them as cattle. They need goats or sheep, you know, for their skins as well as for meat and milk. Camels in many of these places were, you know, in those early days were domesticated for that. At the same time, they're also being domesticated for work. Um, um, you know, you didn't have steam engines, you didn't have mechanized agriculture, so you use them to help you till the crops. So all these, again, all these conditions made, for instance, like the what is today referred to as the Fertile Crescent, you know, area in the Middle East that I talked about earlier, as very uh, uh, provided a set of prime conditions for domestication to happen. Now we have different types of agriculture. I get more detail on those later. I'm just tying it in because subsistence agriculture, which is the production of food primarily for consumption by the farmer's family, largely found in developing countries, is some of the simplest, some of the most, or some of the original ways that agriculture began. Uh, um, and you know, when this first thing, this idea came up, this is what we had. And again, in many places in the world, particularly in developing countries in Africa and parts of Southeast Asia, and these practices still being practiced today for since it has been for, like, you know, 10,000 years or so. Um, Again, the simple idea that you work the land with your hands, and mostly you're going to be doing it to for your own consumption. You're not going to be selling it, which is again the opposite of commercial agriculture, where at some point you say, well, I have enough food to feed my family. I can now maybe sell off the rest of it. And again, in many of these places started out on a small scale. You know, I can sell it to, I can put it out in the farmer's market, and people will come and buy a lot of my surplus product. Eventually it caught on, particularly as countries became more developed, that they were producing, and you know, as technology got better, science got better, you know, I can make way more food than I need for my own family, for my own farm, even for my own community. I can actually sell it, and that really took off, particularly with the advent of capitalism in the mid 1800s or so in developed countries. Um, Now, some of the features that distinguish commercial agriculture from subsistence agriculture is the fact that you are going to have a lower amount of farmers. So in subsistence agriculture, you're going to have way too many farmers, mostly because, again, they're small and they're largely providing food for their own consumption. In a commercial set of agriculture, you're going to have a smaller number of farmers, largely because it's going to be highly mechanized. The farmers are going to be way larger, in many cases owned by large corporations that they have the money. Nowadays, again, with chemicals, with fertilizers, with pesticides, and so on, you can now farm large expanses of land. And again, when you get into sort of like a more corporate type of farming, more commercialized corporate type of farming, I mean, we're talking big companies that invest a lot of money in fertilizers and seeds and mechanized and tractors and stuff like that. And but because it's more efficient, you're going to have way less, it's going to require a less number of farmers to produce, you know, by large extent, more amounts of food than a subsistence farmer would. So here's, if you want to start looking at this particular fact and how it is manifested throughout the world, the map that I'm showing you right here shows, again, developing countries. Again, those are the poorer countries usually. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about all these definitions, what makes a country develop and what are some of the factors that we weigh, that we consider when we look at, you know, a development. So we can see the places that are really deep dark, purple, deep purple, they are going to be where 50% of the labor force is engaged in agriculture. And you can see that happening extensively in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, you know, if you ever take the World Geography class, we talk about how that basically what is happening there. It is you have a huge number of people that are engaged in agriculture. In fact, it's largely women. Women are the ones that usually take, in addition to taking a lot of the home chores, one of the tasks is also to domesticate plants, to grow the crops as well as animals. And you can see also a very rural area, very rural countries such as India and China, despite, you know, all the high levels of urbanization, high levels of modernization undergoing both countries, they're still very rural society, very rural societies, and as a result, a huge number of people are involved in of their labor forces are involved in agriculture. And again, you see the more developed the country is, usually the less amount of people, less amount of people are going to be involved in agriculture. As a percentage, less of that. You can see that in North America, including Canada and the United States, and some parts in South America as well, like Argentina and Brazil, and of course in a lot of places in Europe, where you have places, you know, where there's 5% of the less than 5% of the labor force is engaged in agriculture. Again, these maps can tell us a lot of information about conditions regarding agriculture. And what we're going to find out is also when we look at maps that indicate the type of agricultural practice in these different countries, you're going to see a big correlation with subsistence agriculture and commercial agriculture. And again, in the developed countries, you're going to have more commercial agriculture than in the developing countries. Here's another map again, what I was just talking about, the comparison between subsistence and commercial agriculture. Again, here's what this map shows us, that with basically the smaller amounts of farmland per tractor, so you're basically saying we have one tractor per so many acres of land, right? And that's what you measure. It's actually square kilometers. The world uses those. So you're going to see places that, like say North America, which is commercial and developed, there's going to be one tractor per square kilometer of farmland. So there's going to be a lot more tractors for you know, the amount of land that you have available for agriculture. Whereas you see other places where, like say Mexico, for instance, where it's below 0.1 tractor. In other words, a tenth of the tractors that you find available in Mexico are available in the United States. And so again, these figures show you again that the more tractors you have, right, the less land you are going to need to farm, because it's going to be more productive. The less people you're going to have to need to you know, to farm large amounts of food to provide for your population. So again, you see some places where it's way below in places in Africa where very few people have tractors, and so most of the work is done by hand or as I said, with hard labor. So things like that, we can look at this. And again, because where do we get this information? Well, United Nations, particularly the Food Organization, I think FAO or something like that, that keeps the statistics like this and allows us to track getting data from census data and so on from different parts of the world and kind of put it together in an aggregate globally. Now, so looking at the next issue, why do people consume different types of food? And we're going to be looking at diet and nutrition and source of nutrients. Like I say, I'm kind of jumping around, trying to kind of make it flow a little bit better, but we're going to go back to some of those concepts later on when we talk about nutrition and caloric intake and stuff like that, which varies around the world. So we're going to again look at issues of diet and nutrition, and then where the sources of nutrients come from. So consumption of food varies around the world. Again, and I think I put that around earlier already as I was introducing agriculture and geography. But again, largely level of development, physical conditions, and cultural preferences is what determines the kinds of food that people consume around the world. It kind of makes sense, and I'm going to again show you some examples. Anybody knows what menudo is? So you show your hand, or you know who your menudo eaters are. Anybody knows what that is? Show me with your thumbs, or now if you don't know what that is, I mean it's going to sound real gross, but it's basically tribes of beef usually, and in many cultures, people particularly in the culture, many people find that somewhat gross. I mean, but Filipinos eat it as well. People in the Pacific Islands eat it as well. And again, it's just something that is maybe not appealing to a lot of people, but other people eat it as well. Insects. Again, this may sound repellent to a lot of us here in our society, but insects are actually the biggest source of protein for most people in the world. Not meat. Meat, a lot of people eat meat, but insects are actually the biggest source of protein. Anyway, so again, that's where cultural preferences will come. And of course, they're tying also with availability. Now, humans get most of their calories from grains, and we're going to talk about caloric intake and stuff like that. So as we talk about patterns of nutrition around the world. So most people get their calories from rice, corn, and wheat. Just think about the calories that we eat here in our society. They're going to come from either of these products. In some cases, for instance, we may not think that we're eating corn, but a lot of the sweeteners that we have in a lot of the cereals and juices and things that we consume here have corn syrup in it, have a derivative of corn is this sweetener that is made from corn. And again, may be surprising to us, but in most of the world, do not get a lot of the calories from animals. And in fact, when we look at proteins later on as well, we see that that's these products that get a rich source of calories and proteins are not the most that are found around the world. And you can see the distribution of the leading sources of food, of calorie intake, energy that we take from different places in the world. You can see again the maize, being corn, again in much of Central America and parts in Southern Africa. And then you can see rice, mostly in parts of Peru, in some parts in West Africa, and of course in most of South and East Asia, including India. Um, and again, you see wheat. You can see wheat being used in North America. Again, in terms of the sources of calories, um, uh, as well as you see in Europe, Northern Africa, and much of Central Asia, and Russia, and of course including Australia. So again, you can see the distribution, and of course, certain products. And again, when we look, for instance, what the types of consumption of cereals, for instance, the grains that we get, the climatic conditions are going to vary. So it's a lot more difficult to grow wheat in China than it is to grow rice. But even within China, you have a division in the northern part of China. You're going to have people eating more wheat and barley than rice, whereas the southern part, what's called human China, people are going to be consuming more rice. And again, rice is well, not necessarily a tropical product, but it requires a lot of water, which is lots of water available in the tropical regions, as opposed to say in North America, in Europe and North Africa, where there's less water available, and so crops like wheat that require less water are easily grown in there. Um, um, Now, so here are some of the differences in consumptions. Again, in the developing world, we have fewer calories per capita. So people consume fewer calories than in the developed world. And in many cases, they don't have enough. Again, and that's why I sort of moved around some of these issues of consumption and so on. In many cases, it's not enough. It's not enough to provide the basic caloric intake that they need um, um, to have what is called full nutrition. And as a result, we're going to have cases in these parts of the world where there's a lot of malnutrition. We'll talk about some of those things in a minute. Um, and in many of these places in the developing world, again, like I indicated, their intake it comes from largely cereals or grains, and not necessarily from meat. Now, meat, of course, is expensive, and it requires a lot more land, perhaps more mechanization. And in the world, we have more calories per capita. Again, you simply can look at some of the various products. I don't know if you ever Ghanaian food, or if anybody from Ghana or have know something about Ghanaian food. I mean, it looks like meat, but it's all basically all vegetable right here. It's from plantains. We have, of course, some noodles, and you can compare to an English breakfast. Doesn't yeah, at least to me doesn't look very appetizing. It's a lot more calories being consumed there. In many cases, as I'll show you some maps in a minute here, um, uh, is way too much. We go from in the developing world not having enough calories, but in the developed world having more calories than necessary, and again, in many cases, lots and lots and lots of meat. We'll talk about it again, some of the consequences. So that's overconsumption, and of course, the consequences of not enough caloric intake. So again, here a few more things about the physical conditions that benefit certain animals that allow for certain type of production. We simply just talk about rice, for instance. So plants basically are grown based on the climate, the type of soil, the topography that you have. Again, we can see the comparison simply just between sugarcane and barley. And again, like I say, even in China, where you can have anyway, we can make it with rice as well. Sugarcane and rice grow under very similar conditions, but you can see that in terms of the amount of land uh, that is um, that is used for those particular products, you can see that, for instance, things like barley are going to require more temperate climates, different types of soils than those that are available in the tropical regions. Also, of course, like we said earlier, animals take a lot of space. They require feeding, they require, pasture or grazing and so on. And in many cases, of course, they are fed with plants. They are fed with corn. They are fed with, um, you know, um, they call that silage, or simply just a pasture that need to be made available for them to graze around. Like you see the picture here with the sheep that are grazing. And again, where you see actual animals being raised, many of you probably have driven through good old Colinga, California, and then you can just basically smell it. There's rows and acres of just cows, of course, that are cattle that is being raised for meat consumption. Now, cuisine is also, and I kind of threw these around it not fully following with the ski concept, but it's still within the origins and distribution of food. Um, Cuisine, so we talk about food basically just for necessity. Well, we can eat food because we have to, right? We have to have a caloric intake and so on. But cuisine, I guess, talking more in general of food as an expression of culture. Of course, it's going to be based on what grows and whatever we have. It's shaped by necessity, of course. Again, in some places, again, I'm showing some things that may be gross for some of you, but again, I may have that same question about menudo that I asked earlier. How many of you have eaten cabeza tacos, head tacos? Right? They're delicious, by the way. Um, um, these are products again that it may be growth for some people, but again, in many cases, there's not my necessity. In many places in the developing world, you're going to use the entire animal. You're not going to waste anything. You're going to use their, use their head. You're going to use their, they have sesos, for instance, like these temples. The tongue, the lips of the cow are used because you want to take advantage as much as you can. The innards of a lot of animals that, again, many places in the developed world that just toss out or perhaps thrown into like dog food or something like that, are usually eaten by animals. And of course, with cuisine as an expression of culture, they're going to be influenced by historical factors. It's going to be shaped by different cultures that, for instance, have crops in your society, in your country. I'm not sure how many people know sort of the origins of spaghetti. There's Marco Polo making some of the, going through what is called the Silk Road, bringing, some wheat basically over to China, and then the Chinese dealing with the wheat, particularly the northern part of China, and then using it, for stuff that they were already using for a lot of the meal, but then Marco Polo taking it back into Europe, and people like the Italians basically adapting it for their own take, for their own cultural ways that they look at food. Now, again, cuisine, again, as an expression of culture, is always changing as well. Tastes change. Things that perhaps we wouldn't eaten a few years ago, or in many places that still would not be eaten, are still are sort of become the rage at some point. And of course, when we deal with issues of culture, there's this whole issue of authenticity. Hey, let's, where can you find authentic Mexican food, or Taco Bell is not authentic, or what's the other one? Other that so-called Mexican. What is it called? What is that place? You guys know what I'm talking about. Um, I don't think I've ever been. Maybe once. What's the name of that place that pretends to be Mexican? Oh God, I have it on the tip of my tongue. Anybody knows what I'm talking about? Um, Maybe I know. Maybe you like it and embarrassed to admit it. Huh? Well, yeah, those products like that too, like the taco and stuff like that. But what is the name of that place? That oh my God, is anyway. It all come to me. but and so this question always is this really authentic? Even we talk about Chinese food, we talk about Thai food, we talk about different foods, and everybody's to say, well, is that really authentic? I mean, what is really authentic? Mexican food. I mean, it's just a mixture of, yeah, there was a lot of. If you really want to look at say authentic Mexican food, maybe you're gonna look at the Aztec we're eating. They were eating avocado. They were eating a lot of corn, basically tortillas with chiles and stuff like that. Well, is that what we want to call authentic Mexican? We see trends, and all over. Right now, the biggest trend, for instance, in Baja California, in Guadalupe Valley area near Ensenada, with the wine and all, is this whole Baja Med that they talk about. It's a mixture of sort of Mediterranean type styles of food, such as Greek, Italian, and so on, but they mix with Mexican style that in Baja California with local product being raised from the area. Now, is that authentic Mexican food? Then you go down to, say, Mexico City, where you may have, um, again, it's sound gross for a lot of people, but you have grillos. They have these basically worms that are made out Mexican style. Is that Mexican? Is that authentic Mexican? And again, you can say pretty much about anything like that. So my posture here, my what I would like to advance is the idea that really nothing is authentic, and everything is authentic because again, even some of the basic, let's say we look at meatballs or spaghetti, well, that's authentic. Is that authentic Italian food? Well, again, if you look at the history of spaghetti, they just make with a combination of different products. You know, historically they were sort of being created. We look at a lot of Chinese, for instance, a lot of the Chinese food that we eat here in the United States. Um, and you look like chop suey, you look at fried rice, you ask the Chinese, is that authentic Chinese food? And many will say, well, it was created by some of these products that we eat here in the U.S. thinking that they're Chinese or authentic Chinese, were created by necessity as well. Or many of the Chinese immigrants that came. Again, you can say the same thing about tacos, and what is a taco? Did the Aztecs eat tacos? Did that make it authentic? So anyway, so in that respect, again, we can probably have a class on all this stuff, and I'm sure there are some classes on this, whether in sociology or geography or others that talk about cuisine, the types of things that we eat, not just so much by necessity, but by basically by our cultural trait, by our, but basically what's around us, what we understand as delicious. What may one person, one culture understands as delicious, others may consider gross. And I can talk a lot about this a lot and making me hungry too. Anyway, so when we look again, we talk about the caloric intake. When we look at developed countries consuming more calories per person than the average in many developing countries. And you can see the caloric intake, 3,500 kilocalories. That's, 1,000 calories. That's what a kilocalorie is. That eaten by a person in a given day, right? So you can see that, for instance, say in the United States, the caloric intake, the average is 3,500 and above per person per day. Uh, um, a little less in Canada, but you can see some of that in South America. You see some of that in Mexico. You can see some of that in some like Turkey and so on. But you start looking at other countries, other developing countries, such in Sub-Saharan Africa, um, um, where the numbers are way below some of those numbers. You can see that the more developed the country is, the higher levels of caloric intake that you're going to have. In fact, they're so high that we also, North America is leading the world with the highest share of obesity, right? And you can see North America, including Mexico, they have, so you're talking about the percentage of people that are obese. So places that are with this dark maroon color type, it will be 25% or more of the population is going to be considered obese. Again, I'm no expert on sort of physiology of this stuff, but basically obesity is defined here as the body mass index of at least 30 kilograms per meter square. Again, you can convert that into into inches and or pounds if you want to. But again, that's how they measure this. So you can see in terms of the percentage of obesity, the developed countries lead way uh, the world in on that respect. There are places in Southeast Asia and East Asia and South Africa that in many cases they're looking at below 10% of these obesity rates. Again, because in many cases we have areas where probably do not have enough calorie intake. So in the developed world, we have almost the opposite problem than we have, and unfortunately, say some of these issues also transfer into the developing world. Um, uh, some of you maybe know the history of Hawaii, and I read a lot about that. The fact that they have some of the highest rates of obesity in the world now, but that wasn't always the case. Culturally, that is not what Hawaiian people need and or perceive in today's culture. Anyway, we're going to stop it right here. We just hit the time. We're going to continue with this. I'm going to try to see if we can finish this next on Tuesday, so we can move on to sort of where we're supposed to be now into development, chapter 10. So anyway, let me stop the recording. If I can find it. And then just double check in a few people that maybe that I didn't get at the beginning of the class. My pencil go. Let's see. I think I just saw Harris, Jasper, Johnson, Stephen Johnson. Did you make it? Are you here? Stephen Johnson. And how about Darren? Are you here, Darren?
Yes, I am.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I didn't see you at the beginning. And Andre Santos, are you here? Andre Santos? Okay. And how about Williams, Deontay? Do you make it? Are you here? Deontay Williams? Okay. All right, guys. So, and we will, oh, how about James Teets? James Teets? I don't see you here. Okay. All right, guys. So we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good rest of the day. And take care.
Thank you.
Take care.